talk to us about like maybe some of the trends you're seeing in microbiome research. Is it just like the gut brain? The connection. Is it go beyond that? Is it immune? I know immune health is big.
Yeah,
What are you seeing as far as research for microbiome?
absolutely. Well, and I always tell people when we think about the microbiome, the very first thing we have to think about is what can you talk about, and that all is going to stem from. So when we talk about when we're doing clinical trials, we have to think about the regulatory side of things. You're dealing with FDA or FTC in the U.S. The Food and Drug Administration regulates health claims, structure function claims, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is regulating what goes on the advertisements. So we always start our research in the microbiome space with what do you want to say? Start from the end and work backwards. um, and in the safe space in the microbiome world is still all around gut health,
Gut
things
health.
that you can do to support a healthy digestive system, right?
Right.
Um, we so that's I think going to be a core area even still now for the years to come, even though it's not as sexy as brain and immunity. It's still something that you're probably going to see a signal in that area, so it's going to be a component of these studies. um, but definitely cognitive function, which is things like not so much like measuring attention or focus or vigilance. Those are things like word recalls and things you can do that are commonly seen, like if you did a caffeine or a stimulant study, things you can feel and you get a short-term
Right.
effect out
Right.
of.
Right.
But with bacteria, when you're modulating the microbiome, you're changing things like mood,
Mood.
happiness, right? Those things.
Stress. Like
We're
things
actually,
like
yeah,
that.
we're getting ready to launch a brand new study. We just got IRB approval on a novel probiotic to improve happiness, actually. So
I love
there is a
it.
validated questionnaire called the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire. So we're doing a big decentralized study in a virtual environment where we're going to be shipping out, study product, either placebo or probiotic, to participants and measuring their happiness outcomes over time. So
But
I
I
think
think
that's going
that
to be a big area.
I think that's huge though, because I've worked in the cognitive space a lot, right?
Mhm.
And it's always been a space for like attention, concentration, memory, and now we're moving to like the trends of like the happiness, the mood, the
Yep.
stress, like even the sleep crossing over into that and how that affects it. So I love that there's some new research that you guys are performing or thinking about that
Yeah.
relates to the microbiome and cognitive health in that manner, in that fashion. So that's
Definitely.
awesome.
Well, and it helps, over the last few years, there's finally good studies showing that there's mechanistic reasons to study this. There's reasons for how the microbiome can modulate the way you feel.
Yeah,
So we can tie it all back and show, hopefully demonstrate some causality in well-designed human intervention studies.
that's great. I
Um,
love
so
it.
so that immunity is also hot. It's going to be for a long time. The key question when you talk about immunity and microbiome, though, is what outcomes are you measuring? As an example, I tend to like the patient-reported outcomes and tracking of, did you get sick and how severe were your symptoms, and when you're on a intervention that modulates your microbiome, do you get sick less and do you have less severe symptoms? To me, that's kind of the gold standard. Those are tough studies to do though because they require very large sample sizes.
Hmm.
Two examples I can think of if we have the time. We did a study with Carry Ingredients Wellmune product, which is published,
Okay.
where we actually took. So you want to in these studies, I think it's best to look at populations where you can have a stressor. In one study we took these were people training for marathons. So those folks are notoriously susceptible to upper respiratory tract infections because they literally are running themselves down. And we actually showed in that particular study that folks who are taking a yeast beta glucan supplement, so a prebiotic, over time during their marathon training and during post training, they had less symptomatic days, less severe URTIs, and less days missed training. So that's kind of the gold standard, type of study, in my opinion, when you think about microbiome and immunity. A lot of studies are being done where people want to measure all of these really, expensive biomarkers um, that are related to, immune function. I think those are going to be more challenging to do in the future, at least to demonstrate that you actually get sick less.
Yeah.
It's still the gold
No,
standard.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think I think the immunity portion, the cognitive health portion is so great, and for our audience, we have a
Hmm.
very big sports nutrition audience.
Sure.
I think both maybe not directly but indirectly go hand in hand, right? When you talk about sports nutrition and you talk about working out, right? So the better you feel, right? The better mood you're in, right? The more likely you are to get a better workout. I mean, you were talking like in general here, you're doing such intense exercises, maybe short term, that
Hmm.
brings down your immunity. So supplementing your gut, right, your microbiome, and making sure you have that better immune part of that gut will is all related to sports nutrition, being
Yeah.
in the gym, getting a good workout, maybe having a better, intensity type of workout, like having a better immune function for that workout, for example. So I love how it like almost all becomes connected within the sports nutrition space as well.
Definitely. Yeah, it all dovetails, and there's, I think it lends itself well to a lot of the common types of marketing, message that you can use in the space.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
The other area I noticed, I was just at a Probiota Americas conference, is what it's called. It's all
Oh, yes.
is two hot topics are actually the vaginal microbiome
Yeah.
is a very kind of unique area to study because it's very different than the gut microbiome. Where in the gut we're looking at over 1,000 species, over 100 trillion microorganisms, 100-fold greater number of genes relative to the human genome. Very, you want a nice diverse population for health, whereas in the vaginal microbiome you want a very narrow type of microbiome that's mostly lactobacillus. But that's a hot area right now. And something called symbiotics, I'm sorry, postbiotics, that we're going to be seeing, and I think more so in the in the space of cognitive function as
For
well,
sure.
and mood. So
Yeah.
these are actually the dead or inactivated cells, with or without the metabolites, that can modulate the host health. So that's a brand new area. Just in 2021, the definition was finally agreed upon by all the important bodies in the pre-probiotic, postbiotic space. So I think we're going to be seeing an explosion of research in
More
that
of that.
area.
For
Yeah,
sure.
and
I agree
especially
with
there's
that.
tons of opportunities in the sports nutrition world.
Yep. Good. Yeah. And then so tell us how, like, talk to us about like how you even go about starting a
Hmm.
microbiome research study. So what, or give us like the high level, like what's the important points to think about when performing a clinical study on the microbiome? Like
Yeah,
what should these researchers be thinking about? Whether it's contract research organization, institution, what's the high level there?
sure, sure. So external validity, is always key. We want to make sure we're measuring, we're working in the target population of interest, especially when you think about the types of claims that can be made. Number one, we can't be working in disease states. So, your product can't treat, cure, mitigate, prevent. We're working with things that can, support, not even enhance or improve. It's
Yeah.
supporting a healthy, whatever. So that's kind of crucial when we think about how you get started. And to leverage that at our place, we're very fortunate. Over the years, we've built a database of about 20 to 25,000 people, kind of fluctuates over time. So we can very easily target, unique demographics. So, because sometimes you want to only speak to 18 to 30-year-old females who are marathon runners, whereas other times you need a very, wide population that's more representative of the entire U.S. population. So we kind of think about external validity in that context, and how um, you know, who are you speaking to? With respect to just thinking about the microbiome and sample collection, and other things that can confound your data, because you can go out and eat a bunch of pizza and ice cream one night and completely introduce like a transient dysbiosis and completely alter your microbiome. So we put a lot of care in our dietary intervention studies to make sure that the diet around sample collection is consistent. So we'll go as far as feeding people a controlled diet for say 3 days, as they're collecting their stool samples, to make sure that that background dietary exposure during the intervention period is consistent as much as possible, along with taking things like diet records and maybe even measuring biomarkers of nutrient intake to get some objective measure, that their background diet is consistent over time. Because
Yeah.
that's going to be the biggest, very confounder that introduces, a lot of variability both between and within people in
That,
these
yeah,
in
it
these
sounds
human
like that
intervention
sample
studies.
collection too is like a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
important
So
aspect of
background diet exposure is obviously the main driver, but even simple things like sample collection. I joke that I can't believe how much time I've thought, thinking about how to collect poop. Um, yeah. But if you think about when someone produces a stool sample, you can't just take. Do you take a simple swipe of fecal matter from the top of that sample, or should you get it from the middle, or kind of mix it around? And if you have the funds, should you take serial samples and combine them to get a more representative, microbiome? So those are things we think a lot about and talk a lot about and work with sponsors and determining what's the optimal
Makes sense.
approach,
Yeah.
and looking at the types of bacteria. There's a new company that just created a pill that you can swallow that actually has a pH sensitive coating that will dissolve away at a certain pH. So if you want to sample like in the small intestine, and then as that coating disappears, there's a couple windows in the pill that will capture the GI fluid over a certain amount of time, and then there's a spring-loaded trap door that closes, and it'll
Sounds
capture
like
that
a tip.
pill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's coming, and I hope to that next year that's something we can start to
Wow.
leverage as well.
It's
Um,
pretty
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Technology is just really taking off these days, huh?
It's amazing. And speaking of that too, so on the back end of things at the end of your microbiome study, you have to think about what types of data are you actually analyzing.
Yeah.
So we partner with some really well known um, microbiome labs to do these analyses because you're working with just astronomically huge data. So
Yeah.
AI is very hot right now, but AIs and machine learning algorithms have been in use for a long time in the microbiome space.
So yeah, so no, so that's great.
Yeah,
It's I mean, all these research of these clinical trials, there's so much to think about when you're starting one for sure. Anything to end it, anything unique you guys at Biofortis do as far as like microbiome? Do you have like specialized fridges? Is there samples that anything that you guys are like, we are the expert because of X, Y, and Z? I would love to hear,
yeah,
your take on that.
yeah. So we don't do, and this is common for most CROs. We don't do any analyses in house,
Right?
but I would say if you can produce it, we can collect it and process it. We have full capabilities in that regards. But I think the advantage for us is knowing who to talk to when you want to do a microbiome study because we have those partnerships established and understand the resources that you will need to do your type of study because again there's so many decisions that need to be made in a microbiome study, especially with respect to what type of sequencing and bioinformatics and other subsequent analyses that you want to do. So it's bringing that scientific expertise to the table to pull your study together. And we do, uh, a lot of food and supplement companies aren't used to. We run our studies just like they were a pharma trial. So we follow all what are called good clinical practice guidelines, as opposed to, say, at an academic site, we have. It's important in your studies to make sure that your data is accurate. So we have all. It's called audit trails in place, so you can go back and look at any point in time in your clinical trial and ask what was done, was it done correctly, and have full confidence that your study is going to live up to the rigors in place if you had to submit your document to say
For
the
sure.
Food and Drug Administration.
And that's great.